matter what time of the day.
She always looks beautiful, Magdalena.
And that's why I don't need to introduce her. We all know her.
Yeah.
Let's do a quick.
Yes, my dearest Magdalena.
How long have we known each other? Has it been, was I still working at...
When did you work, the years that you worked at MSU?
So that's a long while ago. That must be at least 8 years.
At least.
My goodness, that long?
You started 8 years ago there?
I started at Columbia 7 years ago, so it...
Oh, no, it's much more. Well, probably 10 years. Remember you came first to Kai's house?
Yes.
Yep.
Oh, we had such
by train, right?
That's right.
And she met you. We've known you many years.
That's
you barely changed.
Yeah, that's true, isn't it?
Unfair.
She's on preservatives, you know.
Magdalena,
Yes.
I don't know, can you hear me?
Yes.
Dana, would you please lower your camera because you're talking like this, you see?
Okay, I don't want to be seen. All right, no. Okay. Let me see.
Are you making faces?
I wanted to just tell Magdalena something if she hears me.
Yeah, she hears you.
Of course she does.
Oh, okay. Of course, I enjoy all your classical works you do, but I'm enjoying the popular things you're putting on YouTube as well.
Oh, thank you for
Yeah.
watching.
Yeah, I really enjoy it. Yeah.
I didn't watch. I'm satisfied with classical.
Oh, yeah.
Janet.
Hi,
Yeah,
Janet.
watch. Yeah.
Hi, Janet.
You can unmute to say hi.
Yeah.
So yes, that the more jazzy side of things. Yeah, that's I started working on those in the summer, looking at the various transcriptions of Oscar Peterson, of the famous.
Yes.
You are playing by yourself.
Yes,
Yeah.
I have those. Yeah.
Wow, that's. I'm going to find.
Yes, it's
That's
really,
amazing,
it's great. Yeah, I love
Over
listening to
kind
that
of
too. Yeah.
virtuosity, yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
jealous. I really would. One thing that I would really love to do, just a little bit improvise and play with whatever, how lousy it is, but to those chords, to put a few chord progressions smoothly.
So it's 10:30. Ruth, do you want to start?
I don't know, what will I start? We started already. We all know who Magdalena is, and I think it's a reading her bio is losing time. You know,
No, don't read it. Don't read it. We sent it.
You sent it. That's it. And we know her. She's one of our members. Okay, darling, guys, I can't wait to hear this topic. Go ahead. Mute us. Especially me. Especially me, I'm dangerous.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm muting everybody. And I do really feel like a part of the family, having been with you, as it turns out, already more than 9 years, for over more than 9 years. Well, there are good things about not being physically together, and then there are bad things. I certainly never enjoyed the commute to New Jersey because there are always surprises, but I definitely miss our chats and the cookies and the wonderful post-event celebrations that we share. So hopefully next time we meet, we will do it in person. I thought to make the best out of the fact that we are not together by sitting at my harpsichord today at home. And if we do have time, my piano is just across the room, so I can probably just shift the computer so that we can discuss some of the issues of interpretation on the piano, which is what we are mostly concerned with in our jobs. I have never been much of a PowerPoint person, but I have prepared a presentation for today. Let me share it with you. It just seems to be so very convenient when you do things on Zoom. And I want to share a few performances by various pianists and harpsichordists, as well as some new images that I have recently found. So this, for example, this image is a very well-known one of Bach at age 61 in a portrait by Elias Gottlob Hausmann. This is probably the most famous portrait we have of Bach. And this is a really interesting website that I came across recently. Hadi Karimi is an artist who does three-dimensional renderings of various artists' faces based on their descriptions, on the death masks, or the skulls that were discovered. So in this case, we actually don't know for sure where Johann Sebastian Bach's body lies, but at around 1894, there was a skull, there was a skeleton that was found right in around the St. Thomas Church in Leipzig, where Bach worked for so many years, and it was attributed to Bach. And compared with this portrait that you see here, the artist created this 3D render, which looks a little bit like a wax statue in Madame Tussauds, maybe, but I just love how very detailed it is. You will see on that same website of the artist Hadi Karimi here, renderings of Mendelssohn, Schumann, Mozart, Chopin, very interesting, Beethoven. It's really quite wonderful. I love to see all the new projects that he comes up with. So let me stop sharing for a second. I will just give you a short overview of how I would like to plan today's session. So first, I'm going to only just state a few perhaps very obvious facts already about the inventions, just to build a framework. Then I will tell you a little bit about the key structure and why did Bach write those in the keys that he did. It's quite interesting. I don't really have a full answer, but maybe we can think about it together. And then we're going to move on to the pedagogical value of the inventions, and particularly the cantabile that Bach mentions in his preface. One of my favorite sources pertaining to the cantabile discussion is a book by Nicholas Harnoncourt, Music as Speech. And I have some hopefully useful quotes for you to share. Then I'll briefly mention CPE, Bach's method, the Versuch über die wahre Art, das Klavier zu spielen, where he shares with us some of his father's tricks. Then I have queued up a few recordings for comparative listening and commentary. We won't have time to listen to entire inventions, but a few phrases here and there just sort of to illustrate the points. And then I will try to offer my own ideas about performing the inventions on both the harpsichord and the piano. And that includes, pedaling, additions, and anything that you'd like to talk about. So the 15 inventions and sinfonias, 15 and 15, are this collection from 1723. Bach was just moving at the time to Leipzig to get his important steady position at the St. Thomas Kirche. They are two-part contrapuntal pieces, as are the sinfonias, which are in 3 parts. They were originally written as musical exercises for Bach's students or his kids. Some of the material also appears in the Wilhelm Friedemann Klavierbüchlein, which is clearly meant for didactic use. I think we all agree that they are among the finest examples of artistic gems ever written for this purpose, and probably because of this, they became very popular among Bach's pupils and others ever since they were written. The groups of pieces are arranged in an identical fashion. So both the 2 and 3 part inventions have the same key structure, ascending from C major by key, but not chromatically. And it's interesting because just a year before that, Bach had completed the Well-Tempered Clavier, so he had already written in every single major and minor key. Yet in the Inventions, he decides to only write in a certain group of keys, and maybe we can try to figure out together why it is. There is an autograph that exists from 1723, and I think at least fragments of it are available on IMSOP. You know, Bach wrote these inventions in clefs in order to save paper, so I probably wouldn't recommend these as a beginning edition for a young student, because it could be a little scary to look at, but it's a wonderful document to see later once one has learned the piece. Each piece has an incredible variety of ideas on contrapuntal technique, at the same time exploring the wide range of musical expression, using various styles and developing the motifs in a logical fashion. So Bach gives us sort of an insight onto his way of thinking, his judgment, his musical judgment, his taste, and also his knowledge of rhetoric, his knowledge of dance forms, his knowledge of various styles. You know, the two prevalent styles in music being the French and Italian. Most of the inventions will actually be representing that Italian Vivaldi-like style. Just as the Well-Tempered Clavier, the Inventions and Sinfonias never appeared in print during Bach's time, but they were widely disseminated in manuscript copies even before the first printed publication in 1801, and ever since have been the greatest hit. As we all know, there has been probably at least a generation or a school of thought maybe, where the inventions are treated simply as dry exercises for the independence of the two hands. But I think the reason why we gather here is that we all understand that there's just so much more to this music, and that each invention is a really true gift from the greatest teacher one could imagine. So let me reshare and just show you very quickly, speaking of the key structure. This is actually the front page of the Well-Tempered Clavier. So this is a year before, 1722, and Bach, as we all know, has just put 24 preludes and fugues in every major and minor key in there. These squiggles here, I don't know if you heard that theory, but there are musicologists who believe that these squiggles on Bach's manuscript represent the tuning system, which, by the way, was apparently not really equally tempered. So I thought I would play 1 minute of this video where this harpsichordist explains that well-tempered clavier is not necessarily at all equal tempered. That Bach, that Bach had a color in mind for every piece in the cycle, and that they were not at all equal. Let me just make sure. 538. It's an interesting discovery for me. It's also quite new, so I thought I would share it with you. Just 1 minute of this video. Oh, come on. 530. Here we go.
There's a myth out there, which unfortunately still seems to persist, that Bach wrote the Well-Tempered Clavier to demonstrate the ability to play in every tonality through the use of equal temperament. This is absolutely not true, because there is an entire category of unequal temperaments known as circulating or well temperaments, think well-tempered clavier, that allow you to play in every tonality, but unlike equal temperament, these circulating temperaments have varying sizes of thirds and fifths, so that each tonality has its own distinctive color or flavor, if you will, in contrast to the blandness of equal temperament where everything sounds the same. This type of circulating temperament is what Bach had in mind, although we don't know precisely which one he would have used, or if indeed he had a specific one in mind.
I find that really very eye-opening because it shows us how the equal temperament has deprived us of a lot of nuance. And what Bach had in mind, the harpsichordist, we really don't know for sure, but that seems to justify even more those squiggles that we see Bach placing on the front of his manuscripts. Now, the Inventions have been written in the key structure C major, C minor, D minor, E flat major only, E major minor, F major minor, G major minor, A major minor, now B flat major only, and B minor only. So that indicates perhaps either, you know, a tribute to the past, where the pieces were written in only in keys until about 4 sharps or flats, but that would have been done for the reason of tuning. And that video that I just shared is really interesting because this harpsichordist attempts to play the same Bach prelude in 3 different temperaments. But it's not as pertinent to our discussion, so that's why I'm going to send you links later if you wish. The Inventions would not have been written for any of these old tuning systems, so to say, like, for example, the mean tone system, which was used by Frescobaldi or even later his student Froberger, and we know that Bach was very influenced by Froberger's work. The mean tone really tunes the thirds very purely, which means that if you play in F minor, the music already sounds almost impossible to bear. So that is probably the upper limit of what the instrument can do to sound decent. So my theory is that this rather limited number of keys that Bach chose was simply for the students not to have to struggle with the sharps and flats as they are trying to read the score. We know from that our little students just can't stand pieces that have excessive key signatures. Let me move on to the preface, which I just always find to be so very revealing of Bach's way of thinking and of the meaning of that gift. He writes that this volume is an honest method by which the amateurs of the clavichord, especially, however, those desirous of learning, are shown a clear way not only to learn to play cleanly in 2 parts, but also, after further progress, to handle 3 obbligato parts correctly and well. That's the 3-part Inventions. And along with this, not only to obtain good inventions, ideas, but to develop the same well. And so he's also talking about the art of composition, right? The concept of performer and composer were very much connected at that time. Above all, however, Bach writes, to achieve a cantabile style in playing and at the same time acquire a strong foretaste of composition. Cantabile. When I first saw this, I couldn't believe that he was actually using the word cantabile, only later to discover that that word literally describes a way of communicating to the listener. So the music is like a good oration. It's like a good speech that reaches and perhaps even changes the hearts of the listeners. We know that Bach was very well familiar with the concept. Of course, literally cantabile, we know it means in the singing style or simply singable, right? But that wider definition of oratory and communication, I believe, is what was on Bach's mind. Composers such as Scarlatti sometimes use the word cantabile also to describe a particularly, detailed discourse. We know that Bach was very well versed in the art of rhetoric and oratory. When he was a student at the famous Ritter Academy, he was not even a full-time student there. He was simply a servant to the students who attended. But he had thorough education on the art of rhetoric there. Now, the book I mentioned to you by Nicholas Harnoncourt, who was a cellist, viola da gamba player, and conductor, really looking into the so-called early music and what the sources tell us about the interpretation, and above all, in order to make it alive. I think that is just such a precious source. What I loved about Harnoncourt is that he always showed in practice what he did on paper. So just starting from a concept that seems sort of maybe obvious to us, but I love how Harnoncourt is distinguishing between the two types of notation. And the first type of notation of music being simply to record the work, the composition itself. The details of interpretation cannot be deduced from the notation because the work is simply there just for the record. There are no instructions on how to perform it. And the other type being simply a notated performance, perhaps. The notation includes directions for performance. It does not indicate, as in the former case, a form of structure of the composition, the interpretation of which must be deduced from other sources, but rather describes the interpretation as precisely as possible. This passage is to be played in this way. The work then, in theory, emerges automatically, as it were, during performance. So Bach's scores were certainly in that first category, as were most of the scores before 1800, where the work is simply recorded, and it is kind of a skeleton. It's a foundation and a basis for being creative. So that's, to me as a performer, that is a very important thing to keep in mind, knowing that it's simply just the beginning. Many of us have heard from our teachers, oh, if you don't see a note or an ornament that's on the page written by Bach, then it means that it shouldn't be there. Well, in fact, it's the opposite. So these scores are there to develop on, to have fun with. Now, let me move, just very quickly mention the dynamics, because one talks very often about the terrace dynamics and how one couldn't really move within the minutiae of dynamics in the Baroque period, but that's also not entirely correct. So Harnoncourt writes, a passage can of course be played forte and then piano. However, this is not an essential feature of the work or the structure, but rather an added piquancy, a type of ornamentation. What is essential is the small dynamics, which means pronunciation, since it makes the tonal discourse clear. So by that pronunciation, I think Harnoncourt means that cantabile. It's how you say something and how you're going to mold the smallest phrase that is going to create the tension and the overall dynamic. So it's not going to be necessarily about the volume. Harnoncourt also makes it very clear that articulation is absolutely the most important means of expression in Baroque music. In this rather long paragraph, he says that basically one can modify articulation to the point where a a piece may no longer be recognized. And if I were to just rattle off the beginning of Inventions 3 here on the harpsichord, and I must apologize in advance, I have no way of controlling the volume of the harpsichord, so it may feel a little too loud at first. But so here I am playing it with uniform articulation. If you didn't know the piece, you wouldn't even know that I am starting on an upbeat. 1, 2, 3. It just sounds all the same. All the notes are just simply rattled off. And the piano is, as we know, probably the only instrument that allows us to rattle things off this way. On the wind instrument, you must breathe in and out in order to play. On the string instrument, the up bow and down bow create automatically almost the levels of tension and release. On the piano, unfortunately, the idea of simply, typing, rattling things off is all too easy. Another great of the piano and the scholar of Bach, Paul Badura-Skoda, writes about a great deal about articulation in his book Interpreting Bach at the Keyboard. He uses the term micro articulation. So for example, let me stop sharing here for a minute. If I were to take the same line from invention number 3, I'm going to uncouple, and I'm playing it first without the necessary articulation, just rattling it off. Now I'm going to apply this micro articulation, which is really just a collection of small dots and non-legatos and tiny slurs to make sense of the melody, as though to add syllables to it. Right? This way it shows you more clearly what the meter is, the fact that we're starting on an upbeat. Right? And on the harpsichord, this is not even the invention that I want to focus a lot of time on, but just to show you, on a harpsichord, a lot of things will sound so ugly that they will simply be unacceptable. On the piano, we can still get away with a lot more. But the harpsichord, as you know, every key, no matter how hard you press it, responds in the same way. The only thing you can do when you press harder is to simply break it. So in order to create a feeling of legato, you actually have to play over legato, something that Chopin also talked about. I'm holding all my 4 fingers down in order to create a feeling of legato. If I play it in legato as I would on the piano, do you hear the difference? It sounds just completely, as opposed to, it sounds like I am typing. So on the harpsichord, the instrument is particularly demanding and unforgiving in many ways. So certain things sound just so terrible that you can't possibly accept them. As far as, let me talk about ornamentation in a minute. I'd like to move on to the music and how various instrumentalists are treating the inventions, and you can tell them apart from even 3 seconds of listening. So don't. This is no judgment on any of these pianists. They're fantastic players in other repertoire, but here, for example, is Valentina Lisitsa playing this very invention number 2, and you can tell immediately what her approach is to this cycle. Okay, so we can hear the entry of the theme, if you will. But in terms of articulation, there is not much going on. So the pianist decides to play everything non-legato. And that was certainly a school of thought for quite a long time. She writes under here in the description of the video that these are exercises that are meant to push you to the limit, and she did just that. I feel that there is really not much more going on in this performance than pushing one to the limit. This is a historic piano, by no means from the time of Bach. The piano was still very much in development at the time, but an interesting approach to hear. Here is a completely different performance by Tatiana Nikolaeva. Let's hear a little moment. One doesn't want to stop listening to it because it's so lyrical. It is truly singing, maybe more in that 19th century Verdi Puccini style, but it is more certainly expressive in a very different way. And here is, of course, I couldn't resist, Glenn Gould. So you heard Lishica playing everything non-legato, then Tatiana Nikolaeva playing everything extremely legato and lyrical. And Glenn Gould is searching for the various ways to express the main melody, the main theme, if you will, by creating these micro articulations. And they don't come from nowhere. Let me just play one more time how he starts. So Gould understood very well, and I don't mean to give him as an example for everybody to follow, because Gould is his own category, and it's very hard to tell people to follow him without sounding like they're just poor imitations of his style. But as far as articulation is concerned, there were a few simple rules during that period. The first one, and that rule you see over and over in various treatises, French treatises by Couperin and Rameau, then the CPE Bach treatise on playing keyboard instrument. The hand position should be always quiet. One should not stretch the hand unless it is for the final chord. But usually the hand should just stay calm within the so-called 5-finger position. And any leaps would be achieved by simply shifting the hand as opposed to stretching it. This is a much more 19th century kind of a technique. So if you already live by that rule, and if I look at invention here, number 2, that immediately helps. So without having to memorize a whole lot of rules, one simply gets to remember to relax and calm down one's hand into this quiet 5-finger position, and whatever falls outside of it is simply shifted and found in its own time. It also creates these beautiful fluctuations of time. This is something that's done on a harpsichord much more than it is on the piano. It's really the only way on this instrument to produce expression. It's that articulation which has a lot to do with stretching time. Another rather simple rule to remember was that the stepwise motions would be played under one hand or under one slur, and anything larger than a third, including third many times, would be detached. Right? And if you have an interval that's particularly bitter here, like the diminished seventh, it is particularly poignant, and perhaps one should treat it as the high point of the phrase. And what I mean poignant is that one will find plenty examples in Bach's vocal music, especially the sacred music, where that interval is reserved for critical situations. For example, the St. Matthew Passion, where the moment Jesus is betrayed and the cock crows 3 times, you will hear that interval, and then the cock crews 3 times. And so that is that moment that seals Christ's fate. So, without getting into much more detail, another way to articulate is just to make sure that the beats are gently placed. So I'm articulating before the first full beat, because later I will be trying as best as I can to depart from playing things on the beat. I think a lot of the times the music becomes unbearable because the players are so focused on the beat. It makes no sense. So in the words of Bach's own son, Carl Philipp Emanuel, one should always sing the phrase first before attempting to play it. And then all these leaps will take us extra time. All the rising melodic lines will lead our voice to make a crescendo simply because more effort is needed to sing the higher notes. And all of a sudden, the melodic line comes alive. And as I mentioned, on the harpsichord, it is really indispensable. Let me play you this quick fragment here of Chiara Mastini on the harpsichord and how she articulates this melody. So on. There was also something known as paired fingering. This was before Bach's time. We know for sure that he was aware of it. He writes in the Büchlein for Wilhelm Friedemann, the first prelude that he writes for him is actually all about these paired fingerings, meaning, I don't know if you can see me, let me stop sharing so you can see myself. The prelude goes like this. Sorry. 2 3 2 3 2 3 2 3, or 3 4 3 4 3 4 3 4, and it would create these tiny slurs, which are really quite expressive. So even though we don't have to do this, and Bach was very much, with it when it came to using the modern technique of playing the piano, meaning using the thumbs and sometimes using thumbs to move to another position under something that to us is natural. Then it was still kind of a novelty. If you think about the D minor invention, I don't know if you can see my fingers, we hear it a lot played, right, like this. But with the so-called paired fingering, it would have been played 3 2 3 4 3 4. So instead of, right, so it has much more of that kind of speech, that cantabile element. Much more challenging. I know there are very, very few harpsichordists these days who bother with this kind of fingering, because it's very difficult, very challenging. So you just heard a whole bunch of approaches to this invention number 2. On the harpsichord, one is very lucky to have access to 2 manuals. Oh yes, Ruth, go ahead, please. Could you? Yes.
Yes. What about the left hand? This is, I understand you can manipulate. It's a very clumsy fingering, I suppose. And by the way, I think that it's known that Bach has very fat fingers and the keys were small. So he was avoiding maybe between the black keys reaching that. So that might be just some limitations. He could cover it by his musicality. But what about the left hand? That's also sticking to those fingerings. It doesn't make sense.
Right, probably not anymore in the inventions, but yes, if you think about earlier music, Froberger, the scale would have been played by the left hand. Let's see, 5 4 3 2 3 2 3 2. So you have passages in the music, let's say, of Svelink, Flemish composers, that you would play 3 4 3 4 2, and it's a breakneck kind of a technique, but it gives that speech element to what simply would sound to us like, right, instead of. So this is kind of where Bach is coming from. So he was, just to tell you that he was very familiar with this technique of playing. Yes, he did have rather chubby fingers. We know that he stayed very close to the keyboard always. And I think CPE was the one who joked about how Bach never wanted anybody to find out his own fingerings. The key width was also different than today's piano. So this is probably also a big part of the reason why the thumb was never really used, because there was no room to put your entire palm on the keyboard. So yes, and then also every instrument was so very different. Okay, let me move on to invention 10, because I want to talk quickly also about recognizing dance forms in these inventions. In this case, invention 10 is a gigue. Oops. If you think of the gigue from the 5th French suite, same key, G major, and so on. So this is very much in this spirit. So I have the same lineup of artists playing, starting with Valentina Lisica. a lovely tempo. She manages to do very well on the ornamentation, and I'll talk in a little bit about it. But it's, again, all uniformly non-legato. How long can one stay engaged with this kind of playing? Yeah, depends. Here is Tatiana Nikolaeva doing the same invention. It's so very expressive. Again, Nikolaeva seems to understand completely, what's going on in the music. Her tempo is not very dance-like. It has nothing to do with that jig that one would normally recognize. If you also noticed, she plays all her trills from the main note up. This was a practice also during the time I was growing up. My teachers taught me trills like that. I will talk about ornamentation in just a quick second. Here, this is Glenn Gould playing the same. So this tempo is riveting. I am in love with this tempo, but if you know this invention well, you will notice that he skipped all of the ornaments, even the ones that Bach already wrote, not to mention adding any of them. Interesting, because I don't think there was anything impossible for Glenn Gould to play, but he decided to skip them all together. And again, Gould is searching for this perfect micro-articulation where some of the notes will be slurred and some not. And it is to create the feeling of lightness. The very important idea in dance music is to, after you've hit the downbeat, to let go. Is that idea of immediate lightness, and this is where we're also talking about the Baroque dance and really being sort of floating above the floor. Let's listen to it again. So yes, he's going, by the way, I'm sounding a half step lower because I'm tuned to A415. He is lighting up toward the end of the phrase by making the notes shorter and shorter and lighter, more delicate. And then what I loved about Nikolaeva is that she recognized that these are simply sequences, right? So nothing that interesting going on. I think in the words of Victor Borge, Bach may have been thinking of something else for a moment. So what she recognized, and this is not something that Gould chose to do, is to sort of overhold and bunch up certain notes that are not melodic but simply arpeggios, to bunch them up by overholding, and these are melodic. This way we get a little bit more of that resonance. Otherwise, on the harpsichord, it is completely unbearable. So in this case, I really love to play these pieces first on the harpsichord because it teaches me what is absolutely unacceptable, and then my touch becomes that much more sensitive on the piano. Here is again Keramastini. may have noticed that Chiara Massini decided to swap all the trills for mordents. Maybe it is the breakneck speed of the piece that made her do that, but it's an example of really playing with the ornamentation without the pressure of doing what's on the page. Let me just find you here. Stop share. Okay, are there any comments up to this point? All right, I'm going to reshare because when I share, I don't see you. So here is Bach's own ornamentation chart. It's in his own manuscript and it's in clefs, but it doesn't matter if we're not used to looking at it. This is very self-explanatory, and I'm sure you have seen it a million times. So let's say C, E, G, B, D, E. So this first note here with a simple squiggle is going to be a trillo. And the amount of notes in those ornaments depends on the length of the note itself. If that were, let's say, a half note, the trill will automatically last a little bit longer. And we must remember that on the harpsichord, the trill is there mostly to prolong the note, which would otherwise easily decay. So playing trills fast, especially if they're long, can be really, again, unpleasant and jarring to the ear. So it's always a nice idea to start them slower, the way that the harpsichordists did. So you just wind them up so that they don't interfere with the melodic line. A quick mordent, we all know this. And then what's really lovely is that Bach shows us ways to combine ornaments. So if you're ever wondering, did Bach's trills have a Nachschlag, right? Well, in this case, if it's a combination of a trill and a mordent, by all means, that basically sounds like a trill with a Nachschlag. Right? And he is giving us really a clean, blank check to do what we want at any time. Then there's the turns, which can start from upper or lower note, and then the Henley edition is very, very good about carefully copying Bach's own ornaments. So it's lovely to start a trill if you from a lower note, like here, for example. Right? Because it seems to be a logical progression from the melody, where I just came from B. It would have been maybe more jarring if I decided to obey the general rule and take the trill from the upper note. So one has to constantly make decisions and try to rely on one's good taste, which we know was such an important element of being not just an artist but a person. I think it was Quantz, Joachim Quantz, in his treatise on playing the flute, he says, above all, one must have the refined sensitivity of spirit. And that was sort of a rule by which the musicians lived, and good taste, that sensitivity of spirit were of utmost importance. So then here you have a second system, a trill starting on the lower note and ending with a mordent. So we could think of it as that Nachschlag. Same here. So it kind of turns twice. We have lovely appoggiaturas, which I like to use here in measure 14 if you're sitting with the score Invention 10. Instead of, I think it adds a little bit of of that sweet tension, right? And adding ornamentation was really meant to prolong for a little bit longer that sweet dissonance that created tension in music. Okay, and then we have what the French would call porte de voix, is a mordent preceded by a lower appoggiatura. Oh, Rameau did tons of that in his vocal music. And there's one more ornament that is not on the chart, but one can find it in, yes, in invention number 3 in D major. He goes. So you have trill and grace notes going to A. This is something that in French would have been called a tierce coulée, sort of rolled out thirds. What it just looks like without the grace note is, but that grace note sort of lets that third roll, and there is really no prescription on how long and where that middle note should fall in. It should not fall on the beat. It should not feel like a dotted rhythm. So there's a lot of that je ne sais quoi, you know, in the ornamentation. Right, as opposed to or. You have to just sort of let it roll off your tongue. And so these are pretty limitless if you think about the variety of ornamentation that Bach gives us and how we can combine them to our own delight. Let's do a little bit of playing, maybe. How about invention 1, since I believe majority of your students may find this as their favorite, or should we talk about the 8? Joyce, it's yours. Let me talk about 1, since there are no. Ruth?
My favorites are number 2, C minor and F minor.
Ooh, F minor. Okay. Okay.
F minor. Can you talk? It's completely cantabile.
Yes, you absolutely. So let me then go back to number 2. I'm glad that we had a little bit of discussion.
But you can show anything, Doug. No. Yes, first. Most of the kids, I never teach first.
Oh, you don't. Okay, that's interesting.
No. But I don't mind.
Yeah. So I'm going to go over number 2 first, and then I'll come back to the first one. So I already discussed the micro-articulation that Barbara Scotta talks about in his book. So I try to find meaning in every combination of 2 notes. For example, here in measure 2, one could just simply find these notes rather dull, and sometimes students say, well, I don't know what to do with it, there's nothing happening here. But if you think of how Bach structures his motifs, he will more often than not play or compose a motif that starts not on the downbeat. So plenty of examples here. We already start on the offbeat 1. Finish, and that happens to be a downbeat, but it's the lowest point of this phrase. So that's what's important, is that leap. Finish. So more often than not, the notes that are on the beat will actually be ending a previous phrase. And additions such as Czerny or Peters, many times they actually draw, those big fat slurs to outline this. it's very useful, but I think for young students to have that in their face, it may affect them too much. So it's probably more useful if they start hearing these things on their own without the help of those slurs done by Charity. If they're explained these ideas, I think that the kids will understand right away. Oh, let me be fancy and play on 2 different keyboards because I can. So every time now, for each hand, Ruth was asking about the left hand. The left hand must do its best to imitate that micro articulation of the main melody. So if I have this huge leap here in measure 4, I'm going to take time to perform it, even though the right hand is already off to something new. So back to measure 3. And again, measure 5, finish, finish. So that's how I am thinking. That's how Bach's, violinists would have played it. This is how they would be changing their bowing. A singer would change a syllable there. So they don't have to be these radical rests or caesuras. They are simply a change of bow, change of syllable, or in the case of Quandt, who wrote a method on playing the flute, it's a change of syllable when you play from a T to a Ri, for example, tiri, 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 and that immediately gives music a little bit more motion. Another idea in measure 5, if I'm preparing for a trill or an ornamented note that in this case is an appoggiatura in itself, I try to give the previous note a break a little bit sooner. It's that rhetorical silence that makes what comes a little bit more important. Sorry, right? And I don't know if you see it, but on the harpsichord I am forced to overhold in order to project a slur. I'm overholding to create a feeling of legato, otherwise it will sound like. So a completely different technique of playing the instrument. So literally, each voice has a life of its own, and I try to be very sensitive. And I think that the young students even can be taught to be sensitive to the direction of the melody. This is something that Pablo Casals describes. That is very simple. If the melody goes up, you make a small crescendo to bring in more, to highlight the tension, and then do the opposite when the melody descends. So in this case, they're each doing their own thing. Right, my right hand is already on its way down. Meanwhile, the left keeps climbing. So I'd like to be able to highlight this, even though dynamically I cannot do this. And now comes my favorite moment to have the harpsichord, because I don't have to fight for my D with my thumbs. On one manual, it's just always a problem, and one usually ends up making a compromise and throwing out the trill from measure 13. On the double manual, it just sounds like the easiest thing in the world. Let me play it for you again because I get so excited about those things. Another one of those moments where on one piano I would have been crowned to it. I'm exaggerating a little bit. And that's another thing I just came to my mind. As far as retards, at the end, one did very little of actual ritardandos in the way that we know them from the 19th century. What you would do is try to chart forward all the way till the last two notes, which you would simply delay. Just like this. The ritenuto per se was not really in fashion, one could say, unless it was for a rhetorical purpose, you know, when we're talking especially about grief, death, things like that. But even in laments, in Baroque laments, which the F minor invention could be treated as one also doesn't fully make a ritardando until the last minute, last two notes. Just the last two notes. I think I have a gorgeous recording to share with you of this invention by a young clavicordist. As we know, Bach's favorite instrument, keyboard instrument, was the clavichord for its capability of creating crescendo and diminuendo. So, you know, so much for Bach not knowing what it is. The clavichord also has what we call Bebung, is that vibrato feature, where if you move your finger on the key long enough, the tangent stays in touch with the string this whole time, producing producing pressure on the string, and that creates a feeling of vibrato and makes clavichord the one keyboard instrument that is the closest to the human voice, because the overall sound is so very soft. The instrument cannot be really enjoyed by more than 2-3 people at a time. Let's just hear this gorgeous performance. Why is it doing that? I'm so sorry. Technology. I just adore this performance because the ornaments are never rushed. They're always sung. And there is a degree of rubato. I think you'll agree with me, right? That there's a bit of that rubato, which is not the same as the 19th century rubato. But when this player, I don't know his name, but when he plays the third beat, which is a tied note, he takes more time. He purposely delays it, even though his left hand keeps going in tempo. So it is to create that psychological crescendo on that note. And then he very carefully follows, never accenting the notes. And so, again, it is about variety and that tension. Naturally, the tied note is that dissonance that you are preparing, and unfortunately on these instruments the crescendo is impossible, but you have to create again a psychological presence for it. So sort of coming and going, always fluctuating, always undulating. Speaking of that, there are, okay, let me just mention one thing. Pedal or not to pedal. I will just show you this last bit of Invention 10 so you can hear the incredible resonance. Hopefully, over Zoom it comes through. The resonance that stays in the air. If I play the end of Invention 10, I am coupling the keyboards, which means that I now pushed in the upper manual, and that triggers a coupling mechanism underneath. So now both keyboards will play. It is therefore kind of a more celebratory, jubilant type of sound. Let's see. My hands are off, but I don't know if you can still hear this, the G main. The chord is still brewing, right? So we often think, and I know that Sir Andreas Schiff, for example, he would not touch the pedal when he's playing his Bach, but the instrument, the sound box gave quite a bit of reverberation. So that's also something worth keeping in mind. I personally do use pedal in Bach's music, maybe not so much in Inventions, but I try not to be found out when I do that, just to do it very sparingly. Now, as far as motifs and sort of getting off the beats, understanding the structure, there are two inventions that I just quickly want to mention. I know we're jumping back and forth, but Invention 14 in B flat. I know the students also love this one. the whole fun of this invention is to be able to quickly rattle off this motif. And so I really recommend to whoever is learning this piece to always keep that motif, as its own unit, and not attach it to other motifs before or after. So we often break our fingers trying to play perfectly legato, and we substitute. But in fact, that little is like a little firework, and I think it should always stand on its own and be articulated. This can be sometimes boring to the students when they play. Very confusing and boring, but I like to introduce them then to the concept of implied polyphony, where you have two things actually going on. One, up, right? So 1, 2. So I would encourage to put more energy into the upward group and relax down. But always think from the beginning of the motif rather than the downbeat. That's, and when you just look at the inventions, most of them start on the offbeat. So that's a very good training for the students to immediately, even on Invention 1, to understand the kind of motivic workings of inventions, and always hear the melody from da 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 da. So when then they are picking up from any random spot, I like to train them immediately. For example, if they're in measure 11, I don't want them to play. If I ask them to start there, I want them to go. So that always understand that the motif starts on the second 16th note. It will be so important here. And now the left hand. We already start to see the left hand, the motif in augmentation already in left hand. So if they are able to identify those, then it becomes like one of these 3D paintings where if you stare at it long enough, the 3 dimensions appear because the patterns are just unbelievable. In the last 2 measures, we have it inverted in the right hand, da da top, di, da 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 da, right? Instead of we have it downward. Left hand is playing augmentation. So Bach doesn't waste any time. He gives us so much to learn in every single measure. And I assume that's the reason why these inventions are so difficult to play. I think a lot of young students sort of discard them because they want to be on their way to playing the fugues and so on. But I personally, I'm always challenged by the inventions because of the richness and the saturation of intense ideas, the pedagogical ideas. Like here, the motivic work. One can also immediately start experimenting with ornamentation, simply taking the ornamentation chart and applying any random ornament on a long note. Here. Why not? So that they're always challenged and that they realize what a treasure trove that collection is. But just yes.
Three-part dimensions are much harder, of course, right? They cannot jump to fugue without going through
Absolutely.
the 2 and 3-part inventions.
Absolutely, yes.
It's
yes.
pointless. I have one question. May I ask you now?
Of course.
Because I might leave for a minute. In D minor, there's the invention. There are trills, of course, right? Famous. Are they supposed to be kind of freestyle? Boom, let it run crazily, or they should be more controlled? It all depends just on the ability of a person.
Right. And by controlled, do you mean counted out?
Yes, da 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 da. 2 notes against 1, 16.
I see. It's probably a better idea to do 2 against 3 if the students must count them, because some students respond better to counting. I would probably do 2 against 3, otherwise it will sound too mechanical.
Usually they are not, it's polyrhythm, and they are not ready for it.
So in this case, I personally am a fan of just letting it go, starting it slowly and winding it up. So
that's good. That's good. Thank you. Green light.
yes, and then to make sure that the trill is stopped a little bit earlier. So by measure 21, by the end of measure 21. Right? So that you clear out the air before you must move on. Otherwise, especially on the harpsichord, it gets a little too hectic. Right?
It's just like off the cliff.
Exactly. That's a wonderful way to say it. Yes. One little trick here for invention 6, and I know that Bob Harris is working on number 6. I really love to use the same 2 fingers as much as I can for all these little figurations. The students often feel that, and many editions actually make you go legato, and and you break your hands trying to play, especially here. It's so difficult. Meanwhile, if you just treat it as a mordent, it is after all a written out mordent. So. And just a very light motion of the wrist that helps lighten up the mordent, right? We don't want takatam, takatam, takatam. We want then especially here. all of a sudden, I think mentally it takes a lot of weight off just thinking of it as a little doodle, just down and up, down and up, down and up. And the students may find it much more fun to try to use the same 2 fingers for each. In this invention, a very, very important lesson is to distinguish between what's melodic and what's simply chords that are unfolded. So this is obviously melodic, but then here, when you get to measure 29, left hand, right? These are triads, and on the harpsichord, one would certainly, and we have confirmation from treatises, one would certainly overhold to create the feeling of harmony, right? Otherwise, it's just unbelievable. And that's often the reason why people don't like to listen to the harpsichord. Or I remember when I was growing up and I was interested in the harpsichord, people say, no, don't go there because harpsichord is for bad pianists. If they fail as a pianist, they go to the harpsichord. Little do they know. Yes, so it was a terribly messy way to portray all of this variety of ideas and how much one could focus on one idea, such as fingering or the motivic work. Or there are also multiple. There are ways to think of these melodies, maybe ornamented. Although, like I said, Bach tends to pack so much content in these short 2-page pieces that not much more is needed. I believe sometimes his ornamentation helps us pick the tempo. Number 3, one could try to rattle it off. But then measure 3, you get immediately stuck because it's impossible to play gracefully the ornamentation that he's asking for. So we must adjust. That would be probably the quickest. So yeah, the lessons are so many, and every measure is worth 1,000 words of a treatise in this case. I continue to find content that I cannot believe that was there for me the whole time, and I never noticed it before.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I think it seems like it would go on and on and on. You already passed the time.
Oh my goodness! See, yeah, that's how excited I get about the invention.
Wonderful, so much information. Very valuable indeed.
Thank you.
And what I really find that these are treasures, these 2-part inventions, because it's a core approach to music. It's more vocal. If you really sing those melodies, they tell you that you've got to delay. He always on those lips, he always puts them in the right place. So delay, feel it, and then it comes the articulation and dynamics. You really don't need to sing, just play cleanly.
That's what it says. Exactly, and that's why I so much love what CPE.
Hi, Bob.
Just print out, just sing the phrase. Your human voice will not go.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes. Also, the A minor is a wonderful for those who are hyper.
Yes, for those who are hyper. Yes, but also lots of lessons. So
Magdalena.
I was all over the place, but there's just so much to share, and I think each invention has at least 10 concepts that one can.
We really appreciate it. Sherwin has a question. Unmute yourself, Sherwin.
Hi, yes, so thank you. This has been just so amazing. It really has so much information that I just was never given. So I hope we're recording this because I would love to see the recording. Okay, so I have a couple of things. One is how early Lastly, would you teach a student who is just embarking upon the inventions, the little fingerings, the 2, 3, 4, leaving out lots of the thumb? In other words, would you teach them with a more accessible fingering first, and then later, when they're a little more advanced of a player, you would go back and cover the same ground again, but with the more original fingerings?
Probably, because these days, they will need to be able to use their 5 fingers for a variety of repertoire that didn't exist in Bach's time yet. So they usually find that prelude from the Wilhelm Friedemann book as a nice little curiosity, but I wouldn't try, unless they want to pursue that lifestyle. I wouldn't try to show them any more than that prelude.
I see. Okay, thank you. Okay, another question I have, I don't know if it's so much of a question as, some of these things you've mentioned, which are probably all of us should know and understand. If our students were to play them this way in an audition, for example, the Invention 14, the little da-da-da-da-da, if they did it like that, I could imagine a judge saying, "You're playing it out of time," and marking them down a little bit. So I'm trying to think how I would handle that with the student without undermining the judge's understanding, and authority.
Yes, when you just touched upon something that we could spend another 3 hours on, which is playing for yourself and then playing for competitions, and your audience, unless it's a jury or competition, they will go with what you have to offer. But there are some ideas that unfortunately, I would have to skip if a student is preparing for a competition, and we know that there's a certain mold in which a student has to fit. That's why I don't find competitions very conducive to creativity. But surely, some of these techniques, some of that rhythmic freedom that exists in these pieces may not be seen as successful interpretation by some judges. Mm-hmm.
Yes, and I was thinking even in terms of the annual spring auditions, where they just perform to get a rating and an evaluation, a written evaluation and assessment and what have you. It seems a little risky, to do the right thing. And
yes, but these days, with incredible interpretations out there on YouTube, it's worth maybe just to share some of them with the students and see what speaks to them. Maybe they will catch on to an idea and make it theirs well enough to be able to sell it without sounding different.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I could see that. Thank you. The other thing was I'm sorry, what's the title of the book by Paul Badora-Skoda? It was something at the keyboard. Is it Bach at the keyboard? Or?
Interpreting Bach at the keyboard.
Interpreting Bach. Okay, thank you very much. I would like to get that.
Oh,
thank you so much. This has just been amazing. Amazing. Beautiful.
Let me ask you one thing.
Yeah.
One question. Nikolaeva played all those ornaments on the main note.
Right.
It's a Russian school. That's how I learned too. I don't recall starting them from the upper note. Now, but in this country, it's opposite. Oh, it is low. Those always start from the upper note. I think it's a complete nonsense. I think I consider personally that you have to go by the music. Sometimes it's good when you start on the main note, and sometimes from the upper note. So I think there has to be individual approach. Do you agree?
Yes. So the general rule, following the treatises and the time Nikolaeva was recording, that was before these treatises were really available, maybe widely available. And yes, that's what I was also taught to play the trills from the main note. But I agree with you completely that though the treatises say generally one should start on the upper note, sometimes it's more practical and more beautiful, more tasteful to start on the lower. Right. If you start on the main note, okay, fine, or the upper. I prefer to start on the lower note because that's what speaks to me, that's what carries my melody forward. So absolutely, it all depends on context. The Italians were much more relaxed about it. They would say, well, you play from the upper note unless you don't feel like it. And so that's why we love Italians.
Exactly, you're right. They're so free and they just accept the life with easier.
That's right. Exactly. And I think that's the way we should approach the inventions also, just as a music from, with real blood, and,
yes.
and
Wonderful.
not an object. So
thank you very much. Thank you so much.
wonderful to see you.
Thank you, Magdalena, and thank you all for letting me visit. It was wonderful.
We're
I'm
happy.
going straight back to the invention.
Wonderful.
Okay. Okay. Thank you so
Delightful,
much.
Magdalena. We loved it. It was wonderful.
I'll
Thank you.
send you the recording. Thank you.